Good evening, folks. I'm Evisa from Uncle Bobbie's Coffee and Books, and I'm so excited that we're all able to come together tonight to celebrate this fantastic book for young readers, Stand Up, 10 Mighty Women Who Made a Change, written by Brittney Cooper and illustrated by Cathy and Johnson, both of whom are here with us tonight. Thank you to everyone out there who showed up for this really special summer event. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you all that there will be an audience question and answer session after the discussion, and we encourage you to please submit your questions over the course of the conversation using the Ask a Question module at the bottom of the screen. If you haven't already gotten a copy, you can do so now by clicking on the green button below the screen, which will take you to Uncle Bobbie's online bookshop. Or if you happen to be in Philadelphia, in Germantown, you can stop by Uncle Bobbie's in person and pick up your copy. Now, my wonderful book nerds, let's get into it. Allow me to introduce the creators of this gorgeous book and our guests for the evening. A leading feminist voice of our time, professor of women's and gender studies and Africana studies at Rutgers University, Brittney Cooper co-founded the Crunk Feminist Collective. Her cultural commentary has been featured on MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes, the New York Times, New York Magazine, Marie Claire, countless publications. And she's also the author of quite a few Uncle Bobbie's staples, including Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower, Feminist AF, A Guide to Crushing Girlhood, Beyond Respectability, The Intellectual Thought of Race, Women, and the Crunk Feminist Collection. Cathy Ann Johnson, our illustrator, is an award-winning children's book illustrator and the owner of Soul Amazing Productions. It's a company dedicated to children's product creations. Her work has appeared in children's books, magazines, posters, home decor, gifts, and many more. Welcome to our author and illustrator. I'm going to pull you up now. Hi, Brittney.
Hi there.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, Cathy Ann.
Hello.
Great. I'm so happy to have both of you here tonight.
So glad to be here.
Awesome. I'm really excited to get into this beautiful, beautiful book. And I'm going to start by asking a classic question. Why this book and why now?
Yeah. Look, I'm passionate about Black girl magic, past and present. And I've dedicated my life to studying Black women freedom fighters who have the challenges that we face in America, that more is possible, that we don't have to take it. That we can stand up, we can fight back, we can make changes for our people and for the country. And so this was an opportunity to bring that message, which is sort of core to who I am and the work that I do, to a younger audience. And it consistent with the kind of work that I do across my career. And so I want to be in a multi-generational conversation with Black folks, brown folks, and anybody committed to the work of freedom about what that might look like. And how historical figures might inform what we're trying to do in this moment. And so writing this book just became an opportunity to do that. And I think it's also like a hat tip to the nerdy Black girl that I used to be, and nerdy Black girls out in the world. I was a voracious reader as a kid. And, you know, it's very funny. I was talking to my aunt earlier today, and my Aunt Colleen, I told her that I would be shouting her out on some of these book events because when I was an elementary school student, she would make sure that I had books about Black people. She lived in a big city. I lived in a small town. And that meant I had limited access to the kinds of books that one would find at a place like Uncle Bobbie's. So she would go to the 1980s equivalent of Uncle Bobbie's in her big and ship books. And one of those books was a young adult biography of Martin Luther King Jr. And in it, I learned the story of Rosa Parks when I was a fourth grader. That inspired me. You know, I just had never heard of Rosa Parks. And so we put on a fourth grade class play. I Rosa Parks. And I like to think that that sort of set a trajectory for the kind of work I wanted to do in the world. And so Rosa Parks is one of the folks featured in this book. And, and this is me sort of gifting to a new generation the kind of gift that my gave to me, which was to early learning about and look, it mattered for me then in the 80s as an elementary kid because I was experiencing racism. I was certainly I'd been called the N-word by the time I read the story of Rosa Parks. I had, had a white classmate who was a friend of mine not invite me to her birthday party because one of her parents didn't like Black people. And when we think about this moment, one, young people of color are experiencing racism from their teachers, from their classmates, even from people that they call friend. But also we're dealing with a moment where there is a concerted effort to keep young people from learning true American history. And this is a way to intervene in that conversation that is political and that is hopefully impactful, but that is not necessarily combative, but just says this is the truth. And it is a set of truths worth celebrating. And so read this book and revel in all of the, sort of great ways that prior Americans have shown up and shaped the country to be something different than what it is apparently trying to be right now.
Wow. I really like what you said about a multi-generational conversation. And it seems like that's what you were experiencing with your Aunt Colleen. And yeah, it's really, really powerful.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about how your working relationship, both of you together, began on this book?
Yeah. Cathy Ann can talk more about the brilliant way that she made this story come alive visually. But I was working with Scholastic on this book. And so they brought her to me as an illustrator and said, we really think that she would be amazing for this project. And so we were able to get on the phone and chat and really talk together about a vision for this work. And then I got to see some of the early sketches. And I mean, I was sold. Y'all can see why. I mean, the book is, amazing. And so thankfully, Cathy already had a pretty amazing career. She was on Scholastic's radar, and it was a huge honor to be able to work with her.
First of all, I will say that Brittney scared us. Her words were so powerful and honest. Her writings, it didn't talk down to the children. And it was a manuscript. It was a full body, healthy manuscript for a younger child. So when Scholastic brought it to me, the first thing I said, why me? And one of the things the editor says, because you're a producer. And that was a compliment. She said, you work in so many different styles, and with your expertise, we know you'll be able to bring vision to the story. We know it's going to be a trial and error, but we know that you'll be able to just continue to hash at it until we didn't even know what the style, the technique of how to pull all these women together from all these different time periods. Like, how do you do that and make it visually a visual package with the words? And there were a lot of words. So you had to design this book not to overpower her words. I felt like my job was not to create these beautiful paintings or these paintings for myself. The job was to give the book a story that enhanced the words, and we walk away with a complete package. So it took some time. it took a lot to make that happen. And one of the things we thought was important is to integrate the words. And I don't know where that came from. It may have been your idea, Brittney, to have bright, colorful words.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that kind of began to allow us to start seeing how to pull this palette together, because we didn't want it to have that traditional muted palette of the sepia tones. We wanted to be a celebration of women, a celebration of the time periods, to take the kids all the way through the 1400s. Help me, Brittney. On today's time.
Yeah.
So it really was a wonderful partnership, and it took everyone to make this work. Yeah.
Wow. There's like a lot of things come together. when I'm looking at the book, I feel like it could be, a book that that we read together as a family, before bedtime. And it could also be, I wanted to say, I could see this book in schools. I hope that we get something like this in schools that really just takes something from your traditional telling of history, like you said, the sepia tones that we so commonly see, and really making it into like an exciting work of art. You've done a really masterful job. Could you tell me a little bit more about the process? And I also want to know how the 10 women were chosen. Were Did you come up with the names, and then decide to sketch or write? How did they come to you?
Yeah, I sort of keep thinking about this and just saying, look, like I have this is my life's work, is like hanging out with historically amazing Black women. So they're a set that I write about as a scholar and a professor. And these are just women in some ways that I don't necessarily get to write about, but that I think everybody should know about. And so I wanted to do a few things in the choices. I wanted to span the scope of American history. So we begin in the 1700s with Elizabeth Freeman, who is known as Mum Bet, first Black woman to petition the courts and win her freedom. In 1744, to the United States codified as a national body, really important as a way to Black women's freedom struggle precedes even the U.S. being a country, right? And so you have Mum Bet and you have Phyllis Wheatley. I also wanted to have Black women and girls, because the wonderful thing about talking to young people is we don't get the luxury, quite frankly, to wait until we become adults to stand up against injustices. And so inviting young people into a conversation and saying, hey, if you see something that's wrong in your environment now, you can stand up, you can make a difference, in the way that me and my white best friend in the 4th grade were like, we're going to put on a race play. And the irony of that story, of course, is that my classmate, who could not invite me to her birthday party, Martin Luther King. She was a white girl. She asked to play Martin Luther King. Look, there's some problematic parts of the story. It was the 1980s. We put her in up. No one objected. I don't agree with that part. But what I appreciate is the way that this little white girl was trying to have an intervention in her own family around, like, hey, I don't want to be racist, and so I'm going to play Martin Luther King in the class play. So it's both cringy and also endearing, which I think is sort of like how American race relations often go when we're navigating them day to day. But this, hopefully, we're in a different era and we can have better resources so that when we want to stand up against injustices, we know how to do it and we have some for how to do it effectively. And so I wanted, young people to be able to see, hey, we it for a long time. And it's not just a thing that happened 200 years ago or 100 years ago. It's also a thing happening today. So there are, Mari Kokanyi is in this book, who is Miss Flint and who, helped to mobilize around the Flint water crisis. Bree Newsome is in this book, who I just thought was a superhero. I was writing blog posts about how Bree Newsome was a superhero in 2015 when she climbed the flagpole in South Carolina demanding that they take down the Confederate flag. It meant so much to me because I remember chafing as a kid every time I saw the Confederate flag, because I grew up in a place where people flew that flag quite freely. And so it tries to stand age and generation. It tries to think about all the different facets of our freedom struggle. So, Ruby Bridges is here, little elementary school girl. Claudette Colvin is here, which I think is really important as a way to pair with the story of Rosa Parks, because Rosa Parks deserves to be an icon, but it's really important to say Rosa Parks wasn't the first Black person to sit down on a bus seat and demand to be able to choose, right? And in fact, little girls or Black girls were a part of that struggle, and Claudette Colvin was one of those Black girls. So, it just becomes like a way to have that conversation. And I think I wanted to make those kinds of around how long this has happened, who was doing it, and that it wasn't just adults. And so those were the sorts of concerns that shaped my choices. And also just picked folks who were like, who I love. You know, I like Ida B. Wells. She's super crunk, always talks very crazy to people, really didn't care kind of what folks thought. She just said what was true. I feel like we needed examples of that. We need examples of like moxie and audacity and refusal to put up with less than what we are worth. And so these are the women who I think about, past and present. And so, you know, and then in terms of process, I mean, frankly, because this is like, you know, I'm a scholar of Black women, I know a lot of these stories. So I did have to sort of go back into the vault to make sure I had the like details right and that sort of thing. But, you know, these women sort of, you know, live with me as I move through. And so I just wanted to be able to share them with more young folks. So, yeah.
Yeah, it really, so there's something here that feels like this opportunity, it could be rewriting history a little bit. Specifically, like when you mentioned Rosa Parks, you know, we all learned about Rosa Parks in school, or maybe not everyone, but you know, I was an adult before I even heard the name Claudette Colvin. And you also mentioned Mumbet, and I remember the first time I read about Mumbet, and it was, I believe it was in reference to the Sedgwick family. I think like an elder of the Sedgwick family was either her lawyer. And I read this in a biography of Edie Sedgwick years ago. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking that
you mean queering the closet, Eve Sedgwick?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Okay. Yeah, and her family history, Mumbet is mentioned as, I believe, I think she might also be buried with the Sedgwick family.
Oh wow. Okay, missed that, but yes.
But you know, that was the only place I'd heard this name before, mm-hmm. And I think some of the activists, or a lot of the activists in the book, might be just new to people that and that these names haven't come up before. Do you think that we'll see more of some of these more obscure figures featured more prominently in history books going forward?
Look, I hope so. I mean, you know, I learned about Mumbet because of Black women's historians, right? And, you know, and reading their sort of long, you know, push to document this kind of history. So I hope so. I hope that, I think that it takes a long time for the stuff that we learn in academia to actually make it into these more popular texts. You know, if this book inspires folks to think more broadly, and you know, and I try to balance too, because I've gotten a little bit of pushback and critique that has said things like, you know, well, we already know, you know, these women, right? We already, and well, do we? One, we don't know all of them, but two, this is why I wanted to have a mix of the familiar and the unfamiliar, right? Because here's my, let me have my like one crunk moment. Here's my bone to pick about this, because we don't have a problem writing book after book about Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. And when we're talking about Black folks, Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois and James Baldwin, every year we get new books about these same folks, right? New books, children's books, new adult reads about them. And yet somehow the minute you can like name a Black woman, then folks are like, we know her, we've heard of her, on to the next, who you got, right? And it's like, but we don't actually know the depths of these women. And so I'm on the bandwagon of, even if you think you know, hear it again. In the same way that we don't get tired of learning about Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, right? Or any other number of Black freedom fighters. I think it's fine in this book to put a Rosa Parks, Ida B. Wells, or Phyllis Wheatley, and to say, but to understand their stories, to understand that, you know, it's not just Phyllis Wheatley, but it's also Mumbet, or it's not just Rosa Parks, but it's also Claudette Colvin, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'm hopeful that this book can be an intervention in those conversations. And I also hope that the intervention is a particular one, which is, I'm tired of everyone thinking that they know Black women because they know our names. I don't agree. And I think that we need to hear Black women's names far more than we ever do. Because quite frankly, I mean, it just wasn't a child appropriate content to say like Rosa Parks was an anti-rape activist before she was sitting down on a bus. Like we're still learning who the depths of Rosa Parks' own story, for instance. And so if this invites more people to the table and says, hey, I want to learn more about who these women were, then I think this book will have done some of its job for sure.
That would be amazing. That would be such an important step that we need right now.
Yeah.
Cathy Ann, so I want to ask both of you just how long the process took, or how long the project took, and I also I'd like Cathy Ann to give us a little bit more insight on your illustrative process.
Well, it took about maybe a month and a half of dialogue to just wrap our head around how are we going to navigate this story from the beginning to the middle to the end. What does that look like? How do we take this copy that is very mature and make it appropriate for the age group, our target audience? I don't think that this book is just for our target audience. I think it's even for adults. I think it's the type of book that all age groups can read. It's a book that women will read to their children and learn. So we kind of talk about that. We got all those things kind of under our belt, and then we had to start designing the book. And what does that look like? And I wish I had some of the visuals, because I did a lot of different, very rough, let's just hash it out, layouts for this book. I wanted the layout to be contemporary. I didn't want to have a lot of busyness around it, a lot of historical pieces, like, the type of cups that they would drink out of. I wanted to just focus on the character. And so then one of the things we decided was to bring the little girl through the book, to be kind of like a journalist. And so she takes you on this journey to learn a little bit about each one of these women. And I'm going to just show you this, but her name is Miracle. So Miracle, I think we named her last week. Miracle takes every little girl on this journey. And it was my job to design Miracle in a way where every little girl can see themselves. Regardless of who you are, how old you are, you can see yourself as this little girl who's on this journey, who want to take you with them to kind of explore these wonderful women. So once we kind of got past that part, we had a meeting with Brittney, and she basically was our final approval of everything, as far as I know. Kind of talked through our strategy with Brittney, and then we moved forward to start doing the artwork. So a month and a half, almost 2 months of talking, and then 3 months to paint. And I did a lot of sketches. I probably have over hundreds of sketches of these characters. So once we got the approval, it was the grindstone for me. Yeah.
Got you. I want to show just the illustrated image of this character.
That's a Miracle. She's awesome. And every time I see this doll, Cathy Ann, I covet her. I'm like, oh my God. She reminds me of a Cabbage Patch Kid I had in the 80s. But yes, Miracle is such an amazing character to sort of just bring people through this story. I wanted a sassy Black girl, like Cathy Ann gave us just a sassy, self-assured Black girl. In that moment, there's a moment where Black girls are sort of fully embodied. And then there's this moment when they get to tween and early adolescence where they experience assaults on their confidence. And hopefully this book can meet young people in that moment and say, hey, you're right, and can give them a little bit more foundation so that when the assaults, the cultural and social assaults come, that they kind of can go back to that foundation and last through it. Yeah.
Can you each tell me who, I know maybe it's not fair to pick favorites, but which your favorite historical heroine is? I mean, it could be someone in the book or someone that wasn't included. I'm just curious.
I'm going to say this. A lot of the figures I didn't know. I come from a different generation. These figures were not part of my curriculums of the schools. The libraries didn't have those. My book selection came out of Kroger's and Super X. My mom had kind of like this notion of if they don't invite you, there's nothing in there for you. So bookstores for me weren't very welcoming. It wasn't until the next generation that you had more of your Black bookstores, or had product that welcomed me to.
Oh no, I think maybe she froze.
Yeah, it looks a little frozen. Let me see if we can't. I'm going to re-invite Cathy Ann on screen. Okay. But in the meantime, Brittney, can you tell us about your favorites?
I mean, it's such a hard question. You know, it's like I never answered this question the same way that I never answer like what's my favorite book, because I have favorites. But I tend to like the kind of fiery, take no stuff ladies, you know? And so, I mean, I would say here that, I mean, Ida B. Wells is a perennial fave. And I think I like her because in many ways she was misunderstood, but I also like Ida B. Wells because, she had a shopping habit. And sometimes she, I like to tell people this, one of my favorite stories about Ida B. Wells, she would go shopping for, and sometimes she couldn't, right? And so these like cute crusaders, I don't humanize her in that way in this book, because in this book she is a hero. She's a shero for young people. But the reason that I love her is because she was a very real kind of human being, just navigating all kinds of things. And so that is why you will often see her name checked in much of my work, because I appreciate knowing, that she was navigating love and dating. She was fairly ambivalent about marriage and children, because she really wanted to write and to fight for freedom and to sort of call out the operations of white supremacy. And so she inspires me, I think. But I'm also, Mari Copani, is another one. Like, part of the excitement of a book like this and of a moment like this is being able to say young activists are in the streets trying to make things better and not accepting, the set of conditions that have been handed to them. So I can't really choose favorites. And there were so many women that could have been in this book that weren't in the book that I might, want to write about at some point. That, what I hope is that that the more young people read this, that they feel surrounded by the abundance of girl freedom fighters. For me, that's the exciting part, is they're not just two or three, right? It's like I feel the way I feel about like TV right now, where there's so, in 12 we had like one Black female lead on television, that was Kerry Washington in Scandal, which I love. Now you can go to any set of channels and see Black girl leads and Black, woman leads in any time period, Black women showrunners, and that abundance of Black girl everything, like what I want people to feel and what I'm trying to capture, what I'm going to be a part of, in my work and writing.
I love that answer. I also love I love me some Olivia Pope.
Correct.
You mentioned earlier how much of an avid reader you were as a little girl. Can you tell me what your favorite books were?
All things Babysitter's Club. Just it was really a problem. I read them far after I aged out of them, and then I watched the Netflix series voraciously. So anyway, so all things Babysitters Club, Sweet Valley Twins. My favorite Black author, which was basically the Black author that I knew at the time, was Mildred Taylor. So I read many of the Mildred Taylor books, Road to Memphis, Let the Circle Be Unbroken. I also loved Walter Dean Myers. I mean, because that man wrote like books for young Black people for generations and generations. And so, yeah. And one of the things I'm really excited about is, so in the books I'm doing with Scholastic, I'm going to do 2 more picture books with them. They're already in the works. But I'm also doing a middle grade series for little girls that is my homage to the Babysitters Club, but with Black girls. So I have a series coming with Scholastic called The Bees. You'll see book 1 sometime next year. And it's about 3 Black girls who are friends. All their names start with B, and they get into all kinds of shenanigans. And so that's my hat tip to the Babysitters Club of old, but with more diversity on the book side of things than that set of books had. Yeah.
Nice. Oh man, I totally forgot about Sweet Valley.
Yes.
How about you, Cathy Ann? Were you a reader as a child? Or you said bookstore weren't your jam.
I was more of a picture watcher. It's like if I found a good book, I wanted to draw the pictures. Trina Hyman, one of my biggest one. If you look at a lot of my sketches now, and then you go and look at some of her drawings, you can tell that's how I learned how to draw, was drawing her characters. And she did all the kings and the queens. I didn't see myself in the books as kings and queens, but as any little girl, I wanted to be a princess. And Trina Hyman had these beautifully drawn princes. Even the hands were just really eloquently drawn. But the thing that changed my life was Jerry Pinkney. He had done National Geographic, and I had never seen Black people do books. I was in an elementary school, so it had to have been like maybe late 70s, early 80s. And I thought, a Black man did this. And I had never paid attention to National Geographic. I mean, I'm just from a regular neighborhood, you know. That's why books are important, because it gets you to, I mean, I would never dream I would live in Italy. But the first little keyhole, the first little light that said there's life outside somewhere else, and I'm interested in, I just don't know where to find it, came through National Geographics. I became just obsessed with looking at all the pictures and how people lived and the different tribes and the different clothing and just I was obsessed. And even in college, if you go to my home right now, I have tons of National Geographics. I have the whole series probably from the last 40 years. And at that time, I never thought I would live in another country. I didn't even have a passport. It was not in my reach. But there's something about when you just drop a little drop into a child, whatever it is, that's where it begins. They don't even realize it. It's at the unconscious level, and it becomes like a magnet for all type of things to come into their life. And then from that, I never thought I would be working internationally. My first international job in the book was like, I want to get out of the United States and do more of this. Because after I left homework for 25 years, I got a job in an advertising agency, and UNICEF was my big project. I couldn't believe I was sitting at the table talking to people from London and France and China and negotiating those deals in terms of the product and learning how people in Greece like to see things designed as opposed to, as a Black woman, I never dreamed that there was even a job like that. So books and exposure is really important for our kids to see these things, so at least there's a little drop where they can dream. And from there, I was hooked. I love culture. I love travel. And I like seeing things beautiful. So I've become a reader now. I read a lot now, but I didn't grow up reading, not because I wasn't interested, because there wasn't things that interest me enough. I felt like I wasn't invited to that world. Yeah.
Wow. A little birdie told me that you did sketches from the Vatican. What was that like?
Oh, you know what? I'm going to sneak over here to my studio and grab some of the things. If I got some things here that I can kind of share. Um, we have, I guess I can mention this, right, Brittney?
Sure.
There's a museum show that's coming, and so I'm preparing for it. So I had to bring some of the sketches and things that I did from the Vatican. So I'm kind of slowly pulling together some things like our little character. So some of these things will be in that show. There's if you buy a book, you will see the choir scene. And in the choir scene, we have some of the people that I grew up with. They're not the actual people, but their personalities are there. So I don't know if you can see this. Here's like some of the sketches and things that are there. And let's see. Oh, here's some more here that I'm pulling together. So I have just so you know, I have a studio in Italy, but I have a studio in downtown Decatur. And it's like one of the things that I have as a child. My father gave me my first studio. So wherever I land, that's where I draw. So I'm kind of like a gypsy. I was remote before there was a remote. But this is one of my characters that I love. So they were all these little small 3-inch by 3-inch church people for the choir. And there was more. And there's one of the little boys. He looks dark like this because I had to strip him in to the illustrations. Because these choir people, we were working so fast, I didn't know how they were going to look. So some of the pieces we see, which I like that now because now I have all these little portraits. But some of the little pieces that you see in the book, I had to actually just kind of sketch them on site and paint them. It was an emotional experience being in the Vatican for me. My father came from the South. My mother came from the South. And my father's in Sparta, Georgia. At his time, you couldn't go past the 7th grade. So, and he picked cotton, yes. So to see myself around everything beautiful, to work for a corporation, I'm going to say this, that always told me you almost made it as one of the selections that we'll be sending to the Vatican. We'll be sending to London. And for God to make that shift, and this is now my home. When I had, Brittney, when I had your words there, I would go to mass and I looked around. I said, all these women deserve to be designed right here. Wow. And I touch everything. I put my hand on everything. I ran my hand on the sculptures.
You're allowed to do that?
I never asked for permission. I begged for forgiveness.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
And I still do it. Sometimes my husband's just like, you're so funny. You touch everything. I touch every stone, everything. So my imprint is on there. They, check my fingerprints. Mom was there. The most wonderful thing about the Vatican and doing this project is this. It was history for me. It was COVID. So here I was designing these 10 women who had made an impact on history while I was making history. Mm-hmm. The Vatican was, for the first time in history, was empty. There was nobody there. There was no lines there. I just walked into sometimes 3 or 4 people there. And I'm there sitting there where now the guards are just glad to see me. And they're saying, ciao. Wow. That will never happen again. Yeah. And it happened with this book.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Woo. Yeah. I have one more question before I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. When reading this book, I love what you did with not just with the literal words stand up, but also visually with it. I'm thinking about all the little girls who hopefully will read this book and just be inspired on an investigative journey of their own. But what kind of, I know, well, what kind of ways are you imagining or hoping that young people might feel moved to stand up today?
Yeah. Wow. Well, one, I mean, one of the things that we try to do is we play with that notion of standing up, is to make it as expansive as possible. And so asking young people to seize the moment they're in, like a mom bet saying, oh, wow, all these men are saying that all men are created, so why not me, right? It's the why me moment for some people, for some, standing up is finding one's voice and choosing to preach or choosing to write, or choosing to go to school in a world where people tell you that you don't belong and you don't have the right to be there. So I want and feel as expansive as possible. And I want young folks to feel like interventions is to be kind when others are choosing to be unkind is a form of standing up, and also that speaking up against injustices is a form of standing up. And there's so much to stand up for today. For me, the choice to go to school and ask my teacher if we could put on a Rosa Parks play was my way of standing up against a world where I was being teased for talking white and acting white and at the same time being called the N-word by white kids, right? That was kind of what school was like for me as a young person. And so making the choice to be creative, and to use these stories out of history to say I'm part of a legacy, and a lineage, was my way of standing up without necessarily engaging in protest, which I also deeply believe in. So I want young people to look around at things that they want to change or injustices that they see and feel like, hey, I can say something, or I don't have to accept that, or I can create something, right? I can make something, I can do something. Or, as Cathy Ann is sort of sharing with us, or I can make the choice to become someone that I've never seen before. Phyllis Wheatley was a poet, right? Chose to become a creative person, in the face of a massive and white supremacy. So I think they can look all kinds of ways. I'm hoping on particular issues that we see young people can stand up and push us around climate change. I'm hoping that young people push us on guns. I'm hoping to see, young people, of course, around combating white supremacy and refusing this desire to sort of go back to a world. We already know how this story of brazen, unchecked white supremacy ends. We already know the devastation that it creates. And I hope that in sharing with young people these stories, they see, hey, that's not right to treat people in this way. And we don't want to be a part of that. And so we choose to do things differently. And so we see young people pushing. I hope that this makes, what I've said, in other places is, people call Black girls problems, right? We're too loud, too attitudinal, too hard to please, all of this stuff. And part of what I'm trying to do in my writing, quite frankly, is to turn Black girls into problems. I want you to be a whole problem. When you show up at school with your knowledge of history and your sense that you have the right to be there and your desire to be taught things that relate to you, and your sense, as Cathy Ann says, like this idea that you don't get to be in a space because you're not invited, you show up like, oh no, I have invited myself in and I deserve to be here. You will be a problem. But that's the kind of problem that I think I want Black girls to be, because folks already have a narrative of them as problems, of us as problems. And I'm like, I am a problem, but not the way that you think I'm about to be one. And that is what I want my writing to do for literally every generation of Black folk and brown folks who read it. And I want white kids who are reading this work, right, to grow up in a world understanding that Black folk have been integral to the struggle for freedom in this country, and that, and being able to sort of see our humanity and our struggle and have value for that. I think creating and instilling that sense very early is the easiest way that we can, not repeat history as it relates to white folks, right? And I think, affirming the right of Black and brown children to like be confident and belong is the other way that we get, to this kind of freedom project. And so whatever way you want to stand up, whatever way you want to challenge the stuff that you're dealing with, whether it's in the choices of friendships, and here's the other thing too. I mean, and one of the things I say in the book at the end is like, standing up is hard. It's not always easy. This book is colorful and beautiful because I want young people to feel the joy of like, wow, okay, if I do this, like this is a valuable thing to do. But I don't sugarcoat it and tell them like, oh yeah, it's easy. It's really hard sometimes to stand up in the face of injustice, particularly when everybody around you is like letting it go on and not doing anything about it. And I want them to sort of see that the long game of this, though, is what kind of person are you trying to be? Are you trying to be a person on the side of freedom and justice, or are you trying to be a person that shrinks when it gets hard? And I do think that young people are ready for that conversation. The adults might not be, but kids actually are. And, and so I'm having that conversation because I think I was, as a kid, I think I didn't have any choice but to be ready. It's like, here's the last thing. Ruby Bridges didn't have a choice but to be ready to do the hard thing as a 6-year-old, right? So many of our young people don't even have the choice to cop out. They don't have a choice to be cowards. They are in situations where they have to do the hard thing. And I want to affirm that doing the hard thing is how we win in the end.
Absolutely. Our young ones are really on the front lines today.
That's right.
Ooh, y'all are spitting bars. Yeah, now I'm going to pivot to audience questions. We have one. I'll read aloud. This one comes from Stacy. Stacy asks, will the two of you be doing any speaking tours together for children at schools or at libraries? Seeing the two of you as women, as Black women, would be so powerful. Young girls seeing that they could become a writer, an artist, become a college professor, be an artist living in Italy. I'm inspired and I'm 60. Thanks, Stacy.
Love that. So the immediate thing we have, we're doing an exhibition of stand-up at where I work in New Jersey. They're going to mount Cathy Ann's beautiful illustrations in our museum on campus with English and Spanish translations. And she and I will appear together on September the 29th to talk about it. And part of the work that I've done with the museum is for us to be able to invite kids from our local schools to come in and to be a part of that conversation. And so, yes, I anticipate when I am off of summer vacation and back full force that I will be able to spend some time in community with young people reading this book in schools. Some of this is COVID related. Some of this has been launching a book while dealing with some significant family health challenges. So I'm navigating it all. But what I imagine for this book is that it will have a very long life. This is my hope. And that I will have many opportunities to read with children, including children like the one that this book is dedicated to. For me, my reading partner, Annabelle, my little friend Annabelle who goes by Bella, is 9. And one of the things we did together during the pandemic was that she would call me over video chat and we would read books together. And so this book is dedicated to her and to all the littles in my life who I feel a deep duty to and basically it's their criticism and critique that I'm looking for. Like, did Auntie good or not? And so I'll let y'all know
that. Ask them directly. They will not be shy.
You're right.
Okay, we have another question. Oscar asks, can we see a part 2 of this book in the future? Okay, ambitious.
I mean, y'all look, I mean, me and the Cathy Ann collabo, like it's a we'll see. We're busy people, but what I know is that there are many more Black women and girls that I want the world to know about. And so hopefully, I'll be able in many forms to serve that work. And so we'll see the forms that it takes going forward, but it's not off the table.
Nice.
So stay tuned.
It doesn't look like we have more audience questions right now, but there's something that just came to mind that I wanted to ask. We were talking about how standing up is not always easy, and I'm wondering if either of you could share if there were any moments in your lives where you were afraid to stand up for something, and maybe just talk about what that feels like you did with it.
I mean, a little secret about me is that, I actually don't particularly like fighting with people. Like, as a public, sort of have a reputation of getting into fights. It's often, though, at the level of the injustice forms my fear. But I'm never not afraid or nervous, typically, about what all is going to happen when I say the hard thing. So one of the things that I've tried to balance in my life is actually standing up for myself and my own kind of dignity. I was a kid that got bullied a lot, actually. I wasn't a fighter in that way. I was, I got bullied and picked on and teased and kind of put my head down and, dealt with it in that way. So a lot of my journey has been learning what does it mean to sort of like know that my boundaries matter and that, that I can stand up for myself as a person, as someone that I love, is a thing that I say in the book. But also, I find standing up for injustice done to others to be a much easier thing. I find confronting injustices that I personally face to be the harder thing. But I will just say that, there's a situation going on in my life at the moment where I'm having to be an advocate for someone that I love in the healthcare system. And I find even in the standing up there that it is, that I'm nervous because there's a power dynamic. I'm worried the risk of doing it, cause trouble, being too out and rowdy, what will happen. And I think the thing that I'm also trying to say to young people is a thing that I try to tell myself anytime things make me nervous, which is, and do it anyway, right? Because the fear doesn't negate your capacity to do it, or two, your responsibility to do it. And so, I think that we, at every given moment of being a writer, I've learned, and other writers have shared with me, we write the books that we need. And so it's a book that I need in this moment. It is a book that nurtures a part of me that has taken some hits for standing up in the public. And when you do that, the thing that could happen is that you might shrink. So, when I'm doing commentary and other sorts of things, I get death threats, and, people call and ask me to be fired from my job. All kinds of foolishness happens. Some part of this book is just affirming the part of me that is like, it is always right to stand up for what is right and what is just, no matter if it is hard or challenging or scary, do it anyway. And so that's, I think, what I'm hoping, this book means to young people. That is why I think Rosa Parks' story resonated with me, that she was a lady that went to work every day, like the ladies that I knew, in my life growing up, and she got arrested. Like, a terrible thing happened to her because she chose to stand up. And sometimes we risk something when we stand up. And, all of us, young and old, we don't have as much courage as we need, political courage, in our country, in our world, because people are so afraid to risk things that matter to them to stand up. And, we owe it to young people both to talk to them about what it means to risk something. But I also firmly, any words that I'm going to on paper, I feel I do it. The universe challenges me to it if I haven't been in some way. And so I feel like if I'm going to tell young people to stand up, then I'm going to be standing right there beside them, so that these words actually have some integrity behind them.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. That was really vulnerable. Cathy Ann, do you have anything to add?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just real quick. In terms of standing up, my stand is it. You don't choose it; it chooses you. Rosa Parks did not choose to stand up. It chose her, and she had to do something about it. So, Stand Up, the book that is so beautifully written by Brittney Cooper, it gives kids the tools of what to do when standing up chooses them. If there's a bully that pushes you, you didn't choose for that bully to punch you, but you need the tools. You need something in your head, something at your unconscious level that says you don't have to take this anymore. And I think there's something inside of you that's a fighter. That you was like, I can't get rid of this. But hopefully when young people read this book, they say, you know what? This helps me understand that kind of burning passion that I have about these things. And now I know that there are examples for me to look at so I can do something about it. So that's how I feel about it.
Love that.
Oh, thank you. Wow. That was, whew, I feel like my inner child was directly talked to then. Guys, y'all, this has been really, really powerful. I'm really touched. I'm about to make me cry over here. I'm so glad that you guys were able to come on with us tonight and to share more about this book. I'm in love with it. And everyone that knows me, with any young people, you know what y'all getting for your birthdays. Thank you so much to everyone that came out. Thank you for everyone that participated in our question and answer session. Thank you, Brittney and Cathy Ann, so much. And also, thanks to our partners at Scholastic, and especially Audra Boltion Ortiz for helping put this all together. I'm so glad it worked out this way. Please buy your copy of this book. Buy it for all your littles and buy it for your groans too. You can get it at Uncle Bobbie's, and you can also get it by clicking the button below, take you right to Bookshop. Thanks, everyone. Thank you both. I look forward to what's coming next.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation. I appreciate you. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.